Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the launch of Maheen's book, The Mercurial Mr. Bhutto and Other Stories. Maheen Usmani has worked for both print and electronic media as an editor, correspondent, anchor, and writer. Maheen is the author of this particular book, which is available at Liberty Bookstore in Hall 1, and she'll be available for signing after the talk. So you're all advised to rush there and buy the book and get it signed. Well, that was a very short bio, but little bit more detail. Maheen has worked at Geo Television. She was a special correspondent who made feature reports on health, education, minority issues, culture, human rights, environment, gender inequality, video portals, and labor and immigration. So I found a lot of these topics in these short stories that you've written. This is a collection of short stories, and they're very, very short, actually. One of the questions I was interested in asking is that since you've worked in journalism, and journalism is so fact-based, you know, you do your research, and it's usually a who, what, why, where, when, and you try to put in as much research as you can with that. Whereas with fiction, you sort of have to, it's more, in journalism, in pure journalism, the journalist doesn't write about their emotions. It's literally what has happened, the action. Whereas in fiction, it's very much emotion dependent. You know, you're writing about characters, their life, but what they feel about the events of their life. So how did you manage the two? How did you jump? First, what was the jump from fact to fiction for you? How did that happen? And how did you use your journalism background for your fiction?
Thank you, Sonia. I'd like to answer a question that you asked me. Not a question, but a statement that you said the stories are very brief. I feel that in Pakistan, we tend to speak a lot. Like our speeches go on forever. But I believe in the adage, as Shakespeare said, brevity being the soul of wit. I think it's more difficult to say what you want in less words, and that's really an art rather than writing reams and reams, writing a thesis. So that's why I try to keep the stories short. But I try to tell an entire story in every story. The second question, the question that you've asked me about journalism and creativity, which is a really good question. When I was a journalist and I was working for media, I worked for both print as well as electronic. And I really felt, there were a lot of things I used to feel working there as a journalist. And now, remember, journalism is supposed to be objective. Although nowadays, the kind of journalism that we practice is not really objective, I feel. When I look at reporters, I feel that they sometimes are not being neutral. They are not giving an objective picture like they should. However, when I was working in journalism, if you're a thinking person, if you're a person with perception and some sensitivity, you will feel. It's not possible for you not to feel, unless you're numb. So I used to feel a lot, and I used to not convey it in my reporting, but it lodged somewhere in my mind. And my family says I've always been a storyteller. None of them are, except for me. So they say that. So I wanted to use that storytelling bit and what I learned over time in journalism, and I wanted to apply that and go into a creative endeavor, which was different from pure journalism. So it was, let's say it was an experiment. I used to write before for print, and then many times things used to get chopped, something was censored, and maybe my copy editor was not that brilliant as I thought they should be. So I thought, why not write for myself and see how it's received? So that's why I wrote these stories, and one story in particular is called 15 Minutes of Fame.
Yeah, I'm
that is the one that I use my journalism background in that story. So.
Yeah, the story Maheen's referring to, 15 Minutes of Fame, is it's about a guy who is caught in a burning building, and instead of the camera crews trying to rescue him or save him, they're literally very busy focusing their cameras on him because they're trying to get the best exclusive, which will then obviously determine the ratings of their TV channels. So it's a very nice satire on our modern world and what has become important and what is not important and what life means and stuff. What was the germ or the seed for that story? I mean, I have to say, in a lot of ways, it did remind me of 9/11, and especially of, you know, the people jumping off the building and,
Yes.
and things like that. So what was the trajectory for you to write this particular story?
I feel that this whole thing of breaking news, everything is breaking news. And so they tend to, I think journalists and media, I found that when I was working there and when I see the news or I see clips on TV, I feel you lost that ability to be human beings first and journalists later. It's all about being exclusive, breaking coverage. They don't care whether somebody is dying or on the throes of death, things like that.
If I can, wasn't it a caveat of journalism, though, that you are not supposed to interfere when you see something?
You're not supposed to interfere, but if you make people who are in pain, you make them, they're your prey, you actually hunt them. You hunt them for breaking news. You can be a little bit perceptive, a little bit sensitive to their pain also. But you use that to increase your channel ratings, your TRPs. The people who are calling the shots, they don't care. They just want to. So I saw a lot of these kind of incidents on television, and when I was working there, and I used to argue with sometimes my bosses that, you know, this is not how we should be portraying things.
Right.
Why do you have to have non-stop coverage of somebody who's in agony? You can just have a short clip and talk about it.
Did your bosses enjoy you telling them this?
No, they didn't agree with me. And I used to work on, you know, I used to do socio-economic reports like minorities, human rights, health, education. I used to get the smallest slots, like 2 minutes, 1.5 minutes. And we used to have slots in politics where it went on like the pure din coverage tha.
Right.
And I used to say, why can't you give me 3 minutes, 4 minutes? And they're like, nobody's interested in this, Maheen. Why don't you understand this? Only people are interested in politics. Or they're interested in, at that time, there was the judges movement going on. So I said, how boring is it to see judges or the lawyers for 10 hours straight?
Right.
That was like breaking news.
Do you think, sometimes I feel that, I mean, this is something that comes in with fiction and publishing also, is that a lot of times the editors will say that people are not, you want to write about something, and the editors will say, well, people are not going to be interested in this topic, so we don't want to publish it. And I feel it's almost a catch-22. Number one, I don't really know what they're basing their people are not interested in this for the most part. And until you give something to the people, how will you know this? So how did you deal with that? With their saying that people are not interested in this, and this being your beat? How did that?
I used to say that that's an insult to our intelligence. I refuse to believe that people are only interested in this, just politicians and just, ridiculous news segments, entertainment, Bollywood films, Bollywood songs. I mean, for God's sake, let's cover other topics. There are so many things happening in this country, good things. They said, no, aap positive image present kare. So I said, positive image we present karne ke liye. There are people who are doing very good things, so let's portray that also, and let's depict other things also.
But having the politicians on all the time surely is not a positive image.
Yes, I said, like the talk shows, they're like just talking heads. And at times when I used to feel that I have insomnia, if you put on a talk show and the people, they're just talking nonstop, I used to fall asleep, much to the disgust of people around me. They said, why aren't you interested in this?
So to get back to this story for a second and the other stories, what was the seed for the stories? Like, are these stories that when you were doing your own research and stuff, that these stories came to you and you decided to fictionalize them, or were some of them purely from imagination? Like for instance, 15 Minutes of Fame, or some of the other ones, where did they come from?
Some of the things, like sometimes you see some things happening around you, like the Mr. Bhutto story, the Mercurial Mr. Bhutto story, that's the first story. I spent the most time on that story. Because I'm very intrigued by sometimes, I say, politicians get too much coverage, but since we are so obsessed with them, let's talk about them. Let's demystify them. And this narrative that either you love somebody or you hate them. I don't understand this concept, because everyone has shades of gray and nuances like we do, all of us do. So of course our politicians also have them. So why don't we demystify them and talk about them in a sane, rational manner? So Mr. Bhutto, you see, the reason I wrote that story was my father was in the bureaucracy at the time, and Mr. Bhutto was in jail. And when he was prime minister, when he was in jail, when he was on trial, and also during the time when martial law came and General Zia came, all these things I heard from my father and from my mother and from their contemporaries in government. However, that narrative, I never saw that being portrayed or written about in our media, in our books. There was a completely different narrative. So I asked my father that, but you said this happened like this, but this is not what XYZ is saying on Twitter or XYZ has written about. My father said they are lying. it's all lies, distorted narratives. So I told my father, you were there. Why don't you write about it? Why don't you write a book, write your memoirs? So my father said, nay, people will get offended. So I said, why? It's the truth. So my father refused to write. His contemporaries refused to write. So I thought, why don't I write about it, but set it in a fictional setting. Okay. So the first story, Mr. Bhutto, is about Mr. Bhutto seen through the eyes of a child. And I brought in the elements I heard from my father. I also did a lot of research because in media days, I was given 2 documentaries to do on Mr. Bhutto. And at that time, I was completely ignorant. Okay. As they say, ignorance is bliss. So I was just given an assignment that do a report on Mr. Bhutto. Was Mr. Bhutto's hanging a judicial murder? Okay. So that's a very tough topic for someone to handle who doesn't know much about it. So I said, no, I can't do this. I don't know. So they said, go and do your research. Right. Do it. Right. So they gave me 5 minutes, which I was happy about. I finally got some time. You
got 5 whole minutes.
5 whole minutes for a documentary on Mr. Bhutto. And then I went and interviewed people. I read about him. I asked my father. And I built it up. And I found that it was very interesting. So I got kind of hooked on this. And the other one was separation of East Pakistan. I was asked to do that also. So all these things built up in our mind, and a lot of stories and things kept coming, ideas kept coming in my mind and fermenting. So I thought, why not put it down as a short story? So it's a fictional story, but it's about somebody who is an important part of our political life. And I feel that the thing is that if you can't really, I never hear someone say, I like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. I always hear people saying, I love him, or I hate him. Right. And the same, so if you love Mr. Bhutto, you have to hate Imran Khan. If you love Imran Khan, you have to hate Nawaz Sharif. I don't understand this. So I always felt this, that we have started, as a nation, we have started lacking the art of nuance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we've started or
we've always
or there's always something like that, but it does seem to have become more binary.
Yes.
Everyone's thinking is definitely you're either for this or you're against this. And it's not even that, I don't think people lack being able to think nuances, but I think that, and I'd like you to address this, I mean, since you've been a journalist with fiction and stuff, is being able to see nuances something that schools and education have to teach, or is this something which the media can teach also? Because for me, I see people, politicians, talk shows just screaming at each other all the time, which definitely does not teach how to see nuances or even be respectful and polite for differing opinions.
I think media is the wrong person to teach the art of nuance. And all you have to do is to look at our media. They all seem to, they have lost the art of objectivity, so they can't, but they should be teaching the art of nuance.
If not teaching, at least through
portraying it.
Yeah.
They should, but I hardly see it. Yeah. And also where schools are concerned, I also sometimes feel that our schools can, teach children the art of critical thinking. They don't teach that. They just teach them in a very binary fashion. And then the children, I don't blame the children. It's what they're learning at home, and they're learning from their schools.
Well, why do you think critical thinking is not taught?
It's obvious. I can see it because I see sometimes, I feel that people, the common people, the so-called common people who are not as highly educated as many people here or people in your families or friends, I feel they are more open to having a discussion and talk and listening, and sometimes changing their mind, sometimes not changing their mind, and they're far politer. I feel that people who are very highly educated, जैसे कहते हैं ना पढ़े लिखे जाहिल, I think ये भी एक चीज़ पाकिस्तान में बहुत बढ़ गई है, that you may be highly educated, you may have a degree from Harvard or Columbia, but when you speak to those people, they're not willing to, they can be very fundamentalist in their thinking. They're called Taliban fundamentalist, but at times their thinking is very, you have to agree with them or they get very angry. Okay. Why let emotion come in the way of a discussion? Let's talk, let's negotiate, let's talk calmly, don't get so angry. So sometimes people tell me, you're going there, don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics, don't do this. So now, because sometimes you meet with our new government, so you go somewhere and there are people who are PTI supporters, who have voted for Imran Khan, there are people who are Nawaz Sharif supporters. So when you go there, I just kind of, you can make it very easily. Who supports who? Because then they start talking and if they're praising the economy, doing very well, and then you know that which side they're on. So I feel that we should also develop the art of critical thinking and analysis. We admire, we look at BBC and CNN, oh, dekho, they're talking so calmly. Look how calmly they're talking and listening to each other. That is also like a novelty now. And people say that Pakistan was always like, this is another thing that I have a grouse with people, like when they say, older people or younger people, Pakistan is always fundamentalist. Pakistan was always radical. General Zia just came and gave free rein to this, but we were always like this. There was never a compassionate Pakistan. There was never a kinder, gentler Pakistan. We were always like this. And that is not true, because I do remember my parents' generation, how they would talk. They were from opposing political parties, even from different minorities. They would sit very calmly, talk to each other, have a good laugh, argue, and then just have a cigar and, just chill out. And I don't see that now, because we have become,
Your parents liked each other, I'm assuming.
Yes.
That might have made the difference.
Yeah. And also, you see, when you're in your home, I think your home environment counts for a lot. There were times when I was taught something in school that I believed in avidly. And then I spoke to my father and he told me, no, this is not the way it is and this is the way. So I feel at home, when you, as a parent, as an uncle or aunt, you can really help your children to develop a more tolerant way of thinking. For example, we are a very diverse country and we should take pride in our diversity. But the problem is that we all try to conform. We all try to be like each other, which is not possible.
Yeah. In your acknowledgements, you say your father bought you a computer on the condition that you should write a book.
Yes.
So I was wondering why that condition, like what prompted him to, did he know that you wanted to be a writer or write a book? And what if he had not bought that computer? Would you still have ended up writing?
Would I still have been sitting here or not? I'm not sure. As I said, my parents always, my mother especially tells me, oh, she's a storyteller. The way she tells a story, nobody can say so. And my mother never praises me, so I used to think that maybe there's something in this, if Ammi is saying that. But my father, I think he just had this, he kind of felt that I could write. And he always told me that you can write a book, but I used to say, no, I can't write a book, it's too difficult. How can I do it? I can write an article, a blog, but book is too complicated. And he said, no, you have it in you. And my father sometimes would write for Dawn or some other newspapers, and he'd write beautifully, very well. And he once told me, he paid me the ultimate compliment, he said, you can write better than me, but you have to push yourself. So I was just lazy and procrastinating, so he got me a computer and he said, okay, now I've got you the computer, write your book. But I still couldn't do it. I was just sitting around knowing I can't, writer's block or whatever it was. So eventually when I did write the book, so then I wanted to dedicate to my father.
So what prompted that eventual sitting down and writing it? Was there any one particular thing, or you just decided to stop being lazy?
No, I decided to stop being lazy a few years back, but I still couldn't put the book together. I was just confused. And then sometimes...
And was this the book you always wanted to write?
Yes,
or was it
I want to write a novel, really. And like one of those Russian novels like Tolstoy or Chekhov. I used to think, okay, I can do something like with lot of interesting characters and a really complicated plot. In the end, this will happen. But I started writing, it was so... I used to forget, where's the plot going? So I said, this is going to be a disaster. So why don't I break it up into short stories? Because I think that will be better. And at that time, I thought complicated stories, difficult English, I mean hi-fi English, that esoteric English that goes over your head, that's the way to go. But then I realized that, when you read foreign writers, the language flows. There's a beauty in it. It's like a river, waves. So you should write in a way that it flows. It shouldn't get stuck somewhere. And a lot of books that are very much applauded, when I actually bought the books, I couldn't understand them. I would read 3 chapters and I say, I can't finish this book. So I thought either it's because my IQ is low or the person has written a really bad book, but everybody's praising it. So I was trying to go by the, trying to conform, let's put it that way. Then I decided to go my own way. And when I broke it up into short stories, it made me feel much better and lighter. And some stories I added later. So I decided to go for the short story format, although that's more difficult than a novel, actually, come to think of it. It's more difficult. But I love the French and Russian classic writers like Maupassant and Chekhov. I love the way they write. So I decided to put in short stories and not make them very long. That was a conscious decision.
Yeah. No, yours are yours are short. They're
Yeah.
very, very short. So you very deliberately.
I deliberately kept them
that,
short,
yeah.
and I also tried not to ram home the message in each story. I used to write sometimes in a way that was very, like in Pakistan, I think we have this habit of if you write or if you talk or if you depict something on media, that you literally spoon feed the message to the viewer or the reader.
Okay.
So when I read these foreign writers, especially the old ones, I used to feel that they used to leave the reading or the message of the book up to the reader.
Okay.
They would just write something in a very subtle, beautiful fashion, and you were left thinking for days.
Right.
So I said, that is a better way of putting it. So that's when I did that, the stories automatically shortened.
Which feeds into the whole debate of how to foster critical thinking.
Yes.
And because
Leave it
it
up
makes
to the
you
reader.
think,
Yes, leave it up to the
rather
reader.
than telling you what to think.
And some readers did come to me after the book was printed and they bought it, and they came and said, we really like this message, but you didn't write, they didn't,
You
they
didn't
couldn't
tell
really
us what
define.
to think.
They didn't, they weren't able to define it, but they said there was something different, but it made us think for a long time.
Right,
So I
right.
said, okay, that technique succeeded. So.
Okay, good. So you've also said that Karachi is a huge part of the stories,
Yes.
and that they are for Karachi readers. Now, I'm not from Karachi, but I still read it.
No. What I mean to
And
say,
it was-
Karachi readers will really appreciate, like, for example, that story, City of Lights. That's a story on the vagaries of living in Karachi. As everyone knows who lives in Karachi or who has lived in Karachi, it's not easy being a Karachiite. There are a lot of challenges you have to face, from security to water, gas, you name it. Everything, whatever you plan for the day somehow never happens. So you have to keep on, postponing your plans or doing something else. And that's why Karachi people are very alert and very quick thinking, very resourceful, because we have to face challenges. But I feel living in Karachi, if you don't laugh, you will go insane. So City of Lights is a story about living in Karachi, about the electricity woes and the gas and everything, and in a humorous fashion. So that's why I meant maybe somebody in Karachi will appreciate this story more, but the other stories are meant for people.
Sure.
It could be anyone.
Which is because, there's some that are city-specific,
Yes.
but there are enough that,
Like City of Lights
and
is.
even any story that is city-specific, the universality of that still speaks to, in fact, I wanted to ask you, for you, how does the specificity to geographical location and detail combine with the universality of storytelling? Because obviously we all set our stories in specific cities or towns or places or homes or cultures and languages,
yes.
and yet we're writing hopefully to appeal to a larger audience.
Yes.
So whether yours are set in Karachi or mine are in Lahore or Maupassant's are in France or,
Yes.
Tolstoy's are in Russia. Nevertheless, when we read them, we recognize specific, details and stuff in this. So what is your thought about?
Actually, I wanted my first book to be set in Paris. Like you talked about France, because I lived in Paris for a few years, and I really had this wonderful novel set in France. But I was told by a very famous writer, who I shall not name, that you should write books. Your first book should be about your city, where you've grown up in, because you know it very well, and it's part of you. Then your second book, you can branch out and go into other cities. So that is why I set my first book of short stories in Karachi, because I know it so well, like the back of my hand, I feel. And, but maybe from going forward from here, I'd like to experiment and not confine myself to Karachi. I would like to go off to France or wherever, or to London or wherever. And because whenever you travel, if you're a writer or you're somebody who's creative, you're noting things, you're observing things, and you can write. I feel that I can do this. So maybe my next one, I don't want to confine myself geographically. Okay. It did help me in my first book. It was easy. The second one might be more difficult, but I want to branch out and go elsewhere also.
And do you know what you're planning to write? Is it going to be short stories again? Are you going to tackle that novel that you wanted to write?
The novel. I'm tackling the novel.
Do you know what it's about at all? Or?
Actually, well, it might be set in Pakistan for all I know, or maybe it'll have some, a chapter somewhere in France. But something about the way, 2019, and we're talking about current times, not going backwards in the past, because some of these stories are going back in the past, like, for example, Bhutto Saab's era and the 80s. We were going to talk about 70s, but we're going to talk about contemporary times and something more, current.
Right.
But right now, I haven't even formulated the plot, so I can't really tell you, but I have started working on it, because I don't want to be procrastinate and sit on it and not come up with anything.
So what? You've tackled so many different issues and stuff in here. You've mentioned the Bhutto story. We've mentioned 15 Minutes of Fame, which is about the media today and the focus of it, human, hits versus human life. Then you have a story in here about adultery. And I don't want to give it away, but it's a very fascinating story. And a lot of your stories do have twists at the end, which
I like plot twists.
Yes, you have to read the whole story and the end to really get the story. But what would you say was your most difficult topic in here and your most fun one? Like, how long did all the stories take a different amount of time to write, or what was your writing process like?
Okay, I hate this question. What is
Okay,
your
then
writing
don't-
process like?
No,
But
not so much writing process,
Not because
but-
I'm just saying writers are always asked that, and I don't really have a writing process. I hate to say this,
No,
but maybe next book I will have one.
But nevertheless, like, does the idea come to you and you just sit down and the whole story comes out
No,
at
no, no. Are you
once?
kidding me? I wish it
Or-
was that easy.
Okay.
I write bits and pieces, and then the character comes to mind, and then I start writing.
Okay.
And sometimes I might polish or add something else later. The story that was the most difficult to write was Baby. The story, it's about children and how I feel that children are very innocent and very pure, and they tell the truth. It's as they grow, and it's as they grow older that they learn to lie from us, from adults. But the problem is that many times children are not believed. We rather believe adults as opposed to children. So that story was difficult for me to write because it was a serious topic. And I tried to make it, I had to put myself in the shoes of the child and the mother. So it was a bit difficult for me. But that was the most fun was, I think, City of Lights. And even some other stories that were a bit serious, like 50 Shades of Grief. That's a story that, you see, of course, life and death is all part of living in any city. So having lived in Karachi, going to, times of grief, there are people's deaths, there are soyams, there's this. So I just sit there and observe people. So I feel we have a certain, way of, like, you're not really grief-stricken if you don't behave in a certain way, or if you don't dress in a certain way.
Right.
For example, I was once wearing jeans and a shirt or something, and somebody died, and I just said, okay, I'll just go there. And I was told, no, you can't go like that. You're wearing jeans and you're wearing a shirt. And I said, I just put a shawl on top. No. You have to wear shalwar kameez and go. So I said to the person who was telling me, oh, is my grief less if I'm wearing Western clothes as opposed to Eastern clothes? So that story came from there.
Okay.
And that was a fun story for me to write, despite the fact that it was about death and grieving.
Yeah.
So,
No, there is a performance aspect, which you bring up in that story
yes.
about. So I'd like to open the questions up to the audience now. Yes.
Yeah, you can.
Thank you, Maheen. Congratulations on your first book. Two related questions. One is, it's not a comment on your book. Haven't we mined Mr. Bhutto enough in fiction? I mean, since Salman Rushdie wrote Shame, and then all sorts of variations, and even now he and his daughter have been mined. I mean, Sabine Javeri and Beena Shah, even they've talked about his daughter also. I mean, there are many interesting politicians. I mean, one thing which we have routinely done is to throw up all kinds of colorful characters. I mean, Ziaul Haq, I believe, our most horrible looking leader, I think, not only for the times, but he was pretty horrible looking too. He hasn't been adequately mined. I mean, apart from Hanif's one very good attempt. So if I were to ask you as a writer, who else could be mined for effect, like you have mined Bhutto? And second question is, you talked about your Western influences. You talked about your love for Tolstoy and Chekhov. What about Pakistani influences? We have as good masters of the short form as we have in the West. Just
I agree.
a question,
I agree.
Manto, Bedi, but I mean, who in particular would you cite? So just these two questions.
The second question I'll take first. Manto, definitely, because I saw some of his short stories on film and I was just struck how beautifully written they were. They really kind of brought out goosebumps, and they were just wonderful. The Pakistani version of Manto as well as the Indian version, I saw both, and both were brilliant. And they really so yes, I missed out Manto, but the others, since my English is a little bit better than my Urdu, so hence I cited the Russian and the French writers. The first question about mining Mr. Bhutto, I don't think I mined him because this is something that was in my mind. I didn't, if I want to do it for effect, I could have just taken General Zia. I mean, there's so much we can write about him. Maybe I will do that in my next book. But I feel that, no, I don't think there's enough of mining anyone. I think you can write about anyone you want, but it should be with a different take. If you read my story, I know you haven't read my book yet. So if you read my story, you'll find the Mr. Bhutto story very different from the others that have been written about him. It's got shades of gray, there are nuances, there are different things in it. So that's why I wrote that story.
Right. My name is Asir Ajmal. I'm a psychologist, and I was particularly interested in this binary thinking idea because a lot of my work is actually teaching my clients how not to do binary thinking. And that would solve a lot of the problems.
Yes.
Because there's this either or black and white thinking that causes the
Exactly.
problem. But one thing I'm struck by is what you said about children. And I hope you can talk more about this. Because what I've noticed is that children actually do a lot of binary thinking, and they have to be taught how not to. Do you think that's being done in our society? Is anybody teaching the children not to do binary thinking? Because otherwise,
I don't think
that's
so.
all the adults would also do.
I think at my home, it was my parents who taught me not to do binary thinking, because there's stuff I read in my history books that was not true, and I believe that. So for example, in my history books, Indians were depicted as wearing a dhoti and little ponytail at the back and bald. So my mother has roots in India, so when I went there as a kid, and she introduced me to an Indian friend of hers because she grew up there, and he was a Hindu but with some Hindu-sounding name. So I just looked at him, and I was just fascinated. I kept staring at him, and he said, oh, your daughter seems to just, she's taken a shine to me. And I said to him, why aren't you bald? So he was shocked. He said, what do you, and my mother said, what do you mean? I said, no, Ammi, in my book, it says the Hindus all have this little ponytail, and the mother said, I'll talk to you later. Then our mother explained to me that is not what Hindus are, and I had that. So, I mean, my father also, we talked a lot about East Pakistan, what happened there, and, things that the wars. So, I mean, I think that this is an example I'm giving from politics and from things that you can learn as children. But I think children can be taught how not to think in a binary fashion, and we as adults should do that. School should do that, but also parents should do that. It's very important. And I think home environment is very important for developing tolerance and compassion.
Okay.
Yes.
I think Bhutto had many qualities, but in my opinion, in the list of qualities he had, his dynamism would be at the top of the qualities. Would you agree with this, or if you disagree, kindly, what was the main quality you think? In my opinion, he was the most dynamic leader we had in the subcontinent.
Okay, thank you. And Maheen, actually our time is over, so if you
Okay.
can hurry up with this.
Well, I think he was dynamic. I think he had a presence, and he was a great orator. He knew how to give a speech. But I feel, again, like you're saying, he was the most dynamic leader. And maybe there are people here who would say that no, Nawaz Sharif was the most dynamic leader, or Imran Khan is the most dynamic leader. So hence, you see, we all have different perceptions. But I do agree that he was dynamic in his own way, Mr. Bhutto.
Well, thank you, Maheen, for doing this. And we're out of time. And Maheen can take more questions, and she'll be signing her book at Liberty Books. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.